So we're here at the mixing console, and we're gonna go ahead and run through the mix of the drums. We'll start with the kick drum. The EQ is pretty much a low cut at 80 Hertz, because we don't want any low end in the 602. We have a dip at 150, which kind of gets rid of the woominess. We boost at 1.3K to give it kind of a hard attack, and then we're given a nice crispy boost at 8.5 on a high shelf, so it gives us a nice crispy kick sound. The compressor on the kick drum mic is a pretty high 7:1 ratio. It's mildly fast in a attack and a mildly slow release. Pretty much the ratio is just set to where it sounds good with the input gain that we're using. And then we have our expander that's on the 602. It's sort of like a gate, but it doesn't close hard. It kind of softly fades in and fades out. So it's not as noticeable as a standard gate. But that's just there to get rid of any unwanted noise from, say, the bass guitar or whatever. This doesn't need to be open, so we close it. So we'll go ahead and move on over to the SubKick. And the EQ for that is a 35 Hertz boost, because we're trying to get a real nice thumpy sub sound. We're dipping 60 Hertz because we don't really want that real punchy low end in the SubKick, because it's mainly just for the low end thump. So we want it to be not so punchy, more thumpy. And then we're cutting it off at 80 Hertz, high cut. We don't need any high end in the SubKick. That's all coming from the 602 kick drum mic. The compressor on the SubKick is pretty much the same as the 602. Threshold's different, that's about all that's changed. Still a very high ratio. So the gate is still an expander, same kind of concept. We don't need the bass guitar coming into the SubKick and rumbling it away when it's not actually getting hit. So the expander is nice and smooth and keeps it off when it's not being used. So we'll go ahead and have Ian hit the kick and we'll hear what it sounds like. And now we're gonna go ahead and turn off all the processing so you can hear what it sounds like without the EQ, compression, and gate on both the microphones. So go ahead and hit it, Ian. And that's the raw sound of the kick drum without any compression or EQ or anything. And that's the kick drum. So let's go ahead and move on to the snare. The snare EQ is pretty much a low cutoff at 100. So you don't need a real low end in the snare. We have a dip at 200 Hertz-ish, maybe 190. Because it kind of has a lot of body and we just had a little too much, so we dipped that out. And then there's a dip at 460. It's a little too much body, so we kind of brought it out. And then we boosted around 5.7K, just high shelf to give it some crispiness that it needs for the SMD7 that's on the snare. And then the compressor for that is a little bit less a hard ratio, but it has a little bit slower attack so that it gets that crack in there. But then tightens right up right afterwards. And then there is no gate on either the top or bottom snare mic, mainly because you kind of have ghost notes that the drummer plays, and he kind of has intricacies that during maybe a soft part that you kind of don't want to take away, that the gate might not pick up and open up, and you might miss some intricate parts that he's playing. So we just don't do I don't do a gate on that. The snare bottom EQ is pretty much cut off all the way at 250 because I don't need any low end. I've already got it off on the top mic. But I do want it to be kind of papery, kind of sizzly. So I kind of add the papery sound back in at 630 Hertz, 4 dB boost. And then I take away a little bit of harshness of that snare at 3.1K. And then pretty much flat all the way rest of that way out. The compressor is pretty much the same. Not much changes from the compressor of the snare top and the snare bottom. I do want to mention that the polarity switch is on the bottom mic, so that because they're facing each other, you don't want to get phase issues where you're canceling out lows, so low mids. So let's have it on so that we don't have that. We'll go ahead and hear what it sounds like with everything on. And then we'll go ahead and turn off the EQs and compression on both mics So you can hear what it sounds like without all that in there, and the low cut. And that's the snare drum. So let's go ahead and move on to the rack tom and the floor tom. The rack tom is pretty much low cutoff at 80 Hertz. You don't need anything lower than that for what we're doing here. So I have a low shelf at 100 Hertz and out at -5. I have a dip at 140 at -9, pretty harsh because there's a lot of resonance in that first tom that we don't need to get in the house, so we don't want it in there. We have a dip at 4K, pretty much for the harshness of the attack. It's a little bitey, so we dip it out a little bit. And then we have 6.8K boosted with a high shelf all the way out to give it that nice crispy attack. The compressor on the rack tom is a much lower ratio because we don't want to be so aggressive with the compression on the rack tom. We want it to be a little bit more dynamic. We also have a slower attack time so that we can get that attack in there and then it starts clamping down the compression, and then slower release as normal. We are using an expander on the rack tom because we have a higher gain because they're a little bit softer than the kick and the snare. So we want to get rid of all unneeded noise unless he's hitting that tom. And there's also a key filter which is only grabbing the frequency that tom resonates at. So around 130 to 160. I'm grabbing it 153. So it won't open when, like, say the kick is getting hit. It'll only open when it's getting hit. The EQ on the floor tom, it has no low cutoff because we want all that lows to come through. We have a dip at 116, which has pretty much its resonant frequency. We don't need a whole lot of that woominess from that floor tom. There's a little bit of mids that are a little nasty at 650, so we dip that out. And we have a kind of a nasty attack at 3, so I'm dipping that out, and then I'm boosting once again at 7.8 and out on a high shelf. So all this stuff can change depending on what mics and drums you're using and the room that you're in. This is just what we EQ with on our drums in this particular room with these particular mics. The compression on the floor tom is pretty much exactly the same as the rack tom with a different threshold. The expander is pretty much the same as the rack tom, except for we have a key filter a little lower because it responds lower, and we don't need it to be open when it's not getting hit. So that's where that's set. So we'll go ahead and hear the rack tom and the floor tom with everything engaged so you can hear what that sounds like. And now we'll go ahead and turn all the processing off, including the low cut on the rack tom, so you can hear what it sounds like before all that. So you can kind of tell it's a little bit more woomy and not so clean. Let's go ahead and move on to the overheads and see what the EQ looks like on those. So we got a low cutoff at 160. We don't need anything lower than that. They're just pretty much micing the cymbals. They're very close. They're that underheads, just getting the cymbals. Don't really need anything lower than 160. We're dipping out at about 400 Hertz, and then we're boosting at 1K to kind of give them a papery sound. And then taking off all the harsh highs at 7K and out at a high shelf. And there's no gate on the cymbals, so we'll go ahead and hear what the cymbals sound like. And both those mics are linked, so whatever I do to one channel does it to the other, so they're semi-similar. And then one mic, the mic that's on his ride and his crash, is more in the left speakers, and then I have the right overhead more in the right speakers. And to him and his in-ears, he's flipped because he's facing this way, we're facing this way. So let's go ahead and hear what they sound like without any low cut or compression. And that is pretty much what the cymbals sound like. So let's go ahead and hear the whole kit together as one big piece so you can hear what that sounds like. So So remember, mixing changes based on what mics you're using, what drums you're using, how the room sounds. This is just the way that we do it. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to subscribe and like this video and comment if you have any questions. We'll see you next time.